Welcome everyone to Marketing Minutes. We're starting our interview series, and our special guest today is Meg Wehrlen, who is, in my experience, a sorceress designer, someone who's really, really fantastic at her job. So Meg, why don't you introduce yourself, who you are and what you do?
Hi. So I'm Meg. I used to work with Melanie as a creative director, and right now I'm doing motion graphics and design at Webflow. So my experience is mostly managing teams and making sure that marketing teams get the result that they actually expect from designers.
Awesome. So today is really all about kind of figuring out how designers and marketers can work together better. So my first question for you would be, what's one of the main communication differences you see between marketers and designers?
So marketers in general tend to have a very specific idea of the visual result that they want, but they wouldn't necessarily explain what the goal is, what the target is. So a designer would literally do what the marketer is expecting, but it won't be the best result because there's no understanding of who we're talking to and what the goal or the format of the creative is. So that, I would say, is the biggest issue, that we just get a very specific detailed result that's expected, but we don't have an overall idea, so it's never really optimized to the needs of the marketer.
Okay. Do you have an example where a marketer did that very, very good with you? So there was a project where a marketer really communicated clearly and you were able to take that information and really translate it into awesome graphics?
Yeah. So the best format for that is target first. So it kind of looks like a checklist. It's like, what's the target? Like, what's the audience? What is the copy? That's really important. The copy that goes with the creative when it's getting posted. What is the goal intended with the post? So the copy doesn't necessarily always reflect the whole campaign. It's sometimes just one specific post, and we don't know that it has to work with a bunch of other ones. So yeah, target, copy, goal of the creative. And what I really, really like is when the marketer just gives like a general idea of what they're expecting. So not something very specific, because that's something that also happens a lot. A designer can usually tell you what is going to look good and what won't, and a marketer can have like a very specific idea in their head that doesn't translate nicely visually, because sometimes it requires 3D. It's like way too extensive to be actually doable.
You said like a few really interesting things there, one being copy. So I'll be totally honest. Sometimes when I need to, and most marketers do, right? We're working under time pressure just like you guys. So sometimes when I need to just have like the designer work on something until I've fully actually thought about what I want, I'll give them a reference material and I'll be like, I'll give you the copy later. And, let's be honest, secretly, I'm hoping they'll just come up with the copy. Like secretly, I'm like, I'll give you the copy later, but if you have something good, write it. What's your experience in terms of copy? Because I know that that's like usually something that can really mess up a project. So I'm like, I'll give you the copy later, and you think it's 4 sentences and it's actually 27.
So that's actually a good point. There's two main ways of getting that done properly. So the first way is to give all copy. The second one is to give no copy and give the general campaign idea to the designer and the specific post or the goal of each post, and let them come up with everything in terms of copy and just give them the freedom to do whatever they want. And then you can always like double check with them and see what works and what doesn't in terms of messaging. But what's really dangerous in my experience is like the middle ground. It's like, oh, we kind of want that says this, but I don't know, try something. And that's what's really frustrating, because like both parties are expecting the other party to do it, because like it's like a kind of like a victim situation when it's like, oh, I'm not given everything I need, and then the other party is like, maybe it's gonna happen. So yeah, either all the copy written down and very specific expectations, or working with a designer that's kind of like used to coming up with ideas and just giving them the freedom and kind of like trusting them on that, and just like overseeing the copy after, making sure the messaging branding is like in line. But that's the best way. It's all or nothing, but like the middle ground is kind of dangerous.
Yeah, so I'm hearing you say be either super specific or give them freedom. Yeah. That's interesting, because you mentioned being specific earlier as well in terms of when you have an idea as a marketer. Something that I do a lot, especially when I work with emails, I love to pick an email example and just be like, hey, follow this. This is kind of what I want, but adapt it to the brand. What's your experience when people do that? Does that suck as a designer because you're like, I have really great ideas and now this is taking away my creativity? Or, as a designer, it's not just all about creativity. Sometimes it's really about getting shit done. Is that really helpful? And you're like, this is great. I know exactly what you want. I'm going to use that.
So every detail that makes it easier to know what's expected is going to be helpful. So copy is a very specific thing. So when we put like putting copy aside and that copy issue we just discussed, every visual help is going to be appreciated, because that's the biggest thing. Like someone who communicates visual ideas is not going to be, no one interprets it the same way. And usually as designers, the instructions that we get is, oh, I want something minimal, colorful, but not too pop. Like, what do you want me to do with this? So if I have one example or multiple examples, like a mood board, that makes it so much easier for everyone. An example to follow is a good idea, but it's also important to give the messaging again, like to be like, hey, that's what I want, but the goal of the email or the campaign is this. Just so we know where we're going, and it's not only copying everything, because that's also kind of tricky, is that sometimes designers don't really know when they get an example if they want the direction, the messaging direction to be the same or just the visual direction. So being like, that's the visual example, that's the goal of the campaign, that's the best way to go.
Right.
Yeah, because an example is not, we don't really know if the example must be followed entirely, including the messaging, including the goal, or if it's just like visual.
So what about telling you about the target audience? Is that something that's helpful for you guys to know? Because sometimes I wonder, like, okay, hey, our target audience is older female ladies, but actually our branding is super masculine. How does the designer then kind of go like, okay, let's put it together so that it makes sense? Because, sometimes, like, females love male branding. Like, I love not Unsplash. That's a marketing website. Uncrate, which is like a male blog. It's a super male blog. But I love it because they have cool gadgets. It's not like I ever ordered anything from it. It's also slightly more aspirational. But sometimes that happens. And granted, I'm not their main target audience. But for some brands, that is the case, right? How does a designer work with that?
So so we're on the audience question, right?
I did a little bit of a detour there. So select marketing for Uncrate.
Yeah.
Uncrate and take the cars. But yeah, how do you guys work with target audience info?
So the audience can be tricky it really depends on the level of the designer, because not all designers are able to tell what is addressing to what kind of people. But that's really helpful if it's not for designer like themselves, it's going to be for their director, their manager. So how that works, like knowing the target, is that, so there's a bunch of rules that are kind of like, not secret, but it's kind of like, it's not really spoken, that, for example, male design is like high contrast and way darker, and female design is like more round and like fine lines. But
yes, please spill all your designer secrets.
But there's also other levels, and that's something that I used to see a lot in Europe, which was kind of like the financial stability of the audience. And that's also like a big deal. Like, what is going to be a luxury audience, like a more like high-end audience, or what's going to be like an audience that's more like overall accessible to everyone. So it's not only gender, it's not only like a very specific demographic. It can also be what is the level of messaging that we're having. So it's really like the target, even if we think demographic only, what's also useful is like any other information about like the personas, basically. So what would be a persona in the marketing, in messaging research? So there's a lot to say. I'm getting lost myself here.
Everyone, Design 101 University with Meg. Go get it for free.
So yeah, the target would be either a group, so it can be pretty broad, or here's a few personas that we know are really working with the brand.
What's like, so for me, it's really cool to hear you like give us these secret tips and tricks behind how designers think about it. Like just what you said about, male design is high contrast. What's something that you would love marketers to know or understand about design that we usually don't?
The time it takes, that would be great. But I would say kind of like think ahead of the general style that is expected. Because the biggest issues that I've had where like, that's one style. So we're thinking like, let's say photography and flat graphics together. So let's say that's the main campaign, that's what we're doing. And then a marketer would come up like, I have that 3D video, I want that to be one of the ads, which makes no sense. So what I would like marketers to get is that we need like the whole design sphere of the campaign to be cohesive, and to really focus on the messaging and not try to be creative visually, because a marketer doesn't necessarily know what makes sense altogether. So in a weird way, I would like marketers in general to understand that they're not designers, and it's not their job. It's not their job to direct the visuals. If they want to direct the visuals, that's something that happens at the very beginning. Like, that is the type that I want. That's the mood board that I want you to follow. But it's not something that comes per post or like per like sample of campaign, because that's like, that becomes like out of brand pretty fast if the marketer is the one directing the visuals.
Yeah, so like what I'm hearing you say is basically, as marketers, we have visual ideas.
Yeah.
If we don't say from the beginning, this is where I want to go, it doesn't fit the whole branding concept anymore. And we don't even realize, but from a designer's perspective.
Yeah, and sometimes I would say the other point is to trust designers when they tell you that something is not going to work. Like, that's like, I've seen that a lot with a lot of different marketers, actually. I would have a very specific post that's requested that there is no technical way to make that look good. I have an example in mind.
Tell us.
The goal was, I'm not going to say who it was and where it was, but it was a long time ago. The goal was to have a post that was a photo of a woman smiling, and in the smiley would actually spell Monday. And I don't know how in the marketer's head that could have looked good, possibly. But I had to make it in a bunch of different ways to prove that it would not work. And that's a big thing. If someone tells you, there's no way I can make that look good, just let it go. and just be like, okay, that's the messaging, that's the copy, or that's the goal of the creative. Do whatever you want.
I can definitely see that one being a very tricky request. But, I'll be fair. I've had ideas like that myself before, guaranteed, where in my head it looked really great. And then once out, I was like, wow, I can't believe you actually did this and you did not convince me otherwise, because this is not where this concept in my head was going to go at all.
Yeah. And usually there's a lot of, I feel like people see a lot of things in 3D instead of, because obviously 3D takes way longer. So when you imagine a post to be a 3D production, you can kind of like make it whatever you want in your head, but actually doing it in a practical, like actually building it, is something that would take sometimes 2 full days, which is ridiculous for a social post.
Yeah.
So that's also why it needs like, yeah, if a designer tells you no, it's not, it's impossible, is that it's impossible with the time I have and sometimes the knowledge I have of software. And the effort is not worth the time. The effort is not worth the result that it's going to get.
Yeah. What I see too is sometimes with certain brands, like I've seen their branding be so meticulous, so it's so detail oriented, that I've noticed working with designers, and especially you actually, you see details to an extent that I don't see them. So when I'm like, let's make this post like this, you would come back and say, yes, but this doesn't work with the overall brand aesthetic if you look at this and this and this detail on their homepage. Or, you know, sometimes you're lucky enough to have like an actual branding guide, but a lot of the times you're not. So I definitely see where you're coming from with trust the designer a little bit more, because they have a totally different eye.
Yeah, and good designers, because not everyone has a good eye. That's also the problem.
How do you spot a good designer? So how do I know whether I'm a shitty marketer that's bad at communicating, or not a shitty marketer, but how do I know that I'm the one who's not communicating correctly versus this designer is just someone I shouldn't be working with?
Well, I would tell you if you were a shitty marketer.
Okay, we're going to put in Meg's email here, and then everyone's just going to send Meg an email when they're working with designers. Like, thumbs up, thumbs down.
I want to say, okay, there's easy way to spot one. The first one, to me, well, especially because marketers are going to work with a specific brand, is to see how meticulous they are to follow the branding that the company has. Like, that's the biggest one. If the text, like the typography, is not exactly the same, that I'm going to see it right away. And it's like, you're adding spacing between letters, for example. That's not their branding. The line is too thick, not their branding. I feel like, for example, spacing around buttons, like there's the text, there's the outline of the button. That's a big one where people usually mess up when they're not really experienced. I think really typography and spacing is the biggest one. Like how the post or the page or whatever it is balanced with white space, and how the typography is really readable and also follows guidelines. Because typography is something that's really meticulous, and designers that don't like typography are usually not good designers. So I think that's the best way to see it.
It's interesting because I just recently was looking for a new designer to work with, and there was a bunch of applications, and we had a task out. So it was a paid task just to see how they work visually. And this one designer brought me back an email, actually, with a totally different font. And I was like, what? Like I said, feel free to play around with the brand a little bit. You have some room. But don't use a totally different font. Like, I mean, I think they went from, like, a really thick, bold, like, kind of, like, very modern font to cursive. And I was like, why?
And there's so many tools, like plugins for your browser. Like, there's so many ways to actually know what font a company is using. When it's print, I feel like print is like horse, because you have to be a really good designer to actually see what font it is by seeing it printed. So I feel like designers have it easy now because of all the tools to recognize things. You can, like, inspect a page and, like, see with the CSS, like, what the spacing is to have it exactly right if you're really, really picky. But yeah, most don't do it, and that's how you spot the mistakes.
At That's really funny. Can you actually recommend a font tool? Because as a marketer, sometimes I would love to know which font it is.
So there's for Chrome, there's what font? I don't really use it anymore because I use the inspector for everything.
Meg uses her eyes, guys.
Also, I usually know what font it is when I see it. It's like only when it's a new one or a rare one.
I would actually love to see if I have something around here laying around randomly where I could show you that this woman does know her fonts, because she will randomly go, oh, yeah, that's Helvetica. Oh, I think that's Career Sans font. That looks like Oswald to me. And I'm like, what do you do?
Oswald is like ridiculous easy to spot. Helvetica too. Helvetica, yeah. Oh, actually, that's a good one. If you ask on the spot a designer if it's Arial or Helvetica, that's...
Okay, so show them two and say which one is, or show them one and say, hey, is this Arial or Helvetica?
Yeah. But like, cool. don't give them the time to actually check it.
Okay, so like, right on spot.
They're easy to see, but yeah, you have to be used to it.
Okay.
There's some tricks to know.
So let me ask this: what's your favorite trait to work with when you work with a marketer? So, what's a marketer you love to work with because of what? Besides me, of course.
Yes, I was gonna say that.
I messed my hair now doing that.
I like having the freedom to come up with posts in general. I also like the direction, but in general what I like the most is knowing who I'm talking to visually, knowing the overall goal of the campaign, knowing what post has what goal. So usually the best way for that is like an Airtable, like a spreadsheet, with campaign, target audience, and then specific posts. And again, if it's well explained, the copy doesn't have to be there. It's something that can come out of the visual too. So like, oh, post 1 is gonna be, so let's go back to like the Mother's Day thing. First post, 2 weeks prior, what does you like? The post description can be, post about what your mom, like asking the audience what their mom likes. Second post, what's the number one thing you like the most about your mom? And then week 1 prior to Mother's Day, here's a few gift ideas. And that's it. That's like way more than enough. Like you can already, as a designer, make a few posts already out of that. And it's more interesting for us because we can do whatever we want. But again, the messaging has to be clear just so we know what's allowed and what isn't. But yeah, that would be my favorite marketer to work with. It's just overall idea what is going, what's expected, but not in a very specific way.
Essentially, you're just saying teamwork, right?
Yeah.
Like, talk to each other like in a common sense way. I need you to create this for this audience, for this is our goal. This is kind of the design I had in mind. See if it works. But at the end of the day, it's really just teamwork, right? And working with each other.
Yeah, and also I feel like the biggest thing is also being helpful when you clearly see that the other party is struggling. Like what I had in an agency a long time ago was, so we would use Trello for everything. Sometimes I would see a very specific request, like that's the copy that has to be on the visual, that's what I'm expecting. And sometimes there would be a post that's like just a title, nothing else. Well, the best way to work together is just like, oh, that request is empty. So you ask, do you have an idea what you want? If the answer is no, you just come up with something and you just give it. And if it makes sense, then they're going to make copy out of that and be like, oh, they did a part of my job. That's amazing. I'm saving time. And there you go. It's like, it's not always like, oh, all the requests is not properly filled. I'm just going to wait for stuff to come in. Like, it's teamwork. Like, and if you help as a designer, if you help the marketer at this point, they actually might help you back at some point. So it's kind of like a responsibility taking attitude, I feel like.
Would you say that's like your number one tip for designers? Be proactive?
Yeah, because that's a common thing that I see, like waiting for stuff to come in, and if it's not there, just not do anything. It's like, no, if you're helpful, it's gonna be helpful on the other way. Worst case scenario, your visual is not being used. Like, it's no big deal. And usually when you do something, in some way it's being used in the future, or you're going to reuse a template, you're going to reuse something, so it's never a waste.
Okay. You said something earlier that I thought was really interesting, is like you would love marketers to know how long things take. So give us a rough estimate, like how long does it take a designer to make a Facebook post or a Facebook ad or an email or, a landing page? What are like the averages?
So that really depends on how specific, again, the request is. So that's also where it can actually save time. So I actually explained how a designer can help the marketer. The way a marketer can help a designer when the designer is swamped is to be very specific with one request. Like, oh, that's going to be the copy, that's going to be it. And that's going to be faster because the designer knows exactly what to look for. And usually when that happens, the best way is to be kind of like minimal with the idea and not be too creative. For example, again, Mother's Day. I don't know where I started with that. Find
Mother's Day themed video. I'm loving it.
But yeah, like, find a photo of a mother, and just like use the title, what are you the most grateful for? That's like a really simple post that can be really fast. So the longest time, like what would take the most time out of making this post, for example, would be to find a photo, to find the perfect photo that works with the messaging. So I would say that would be, I'm going to go with 20 minutes as like a general idea, and that would be like a Facebook post, or like a static in general, just to anticipate that sometimes you can't really find a photo that you want. That happened to me way more than I thought. like, oh, this is going to take 5 minutes. No, because, Shutterstock is not unlimited and doesn't give you what's in your brain. So,
that really upsets me all the time.
Yeah.
So, like, how does this photo not exist in reality?
Yeah, I want a dog on top of a goat on top of an elephant. How come this is not existing in real life? What's so hard about this?
I feel that.
Wait, what was the question? I was kind of like starting to visualize the thing. Oh yeah, time estimates. So yeah, 20 minutes for something that's like really like high direction as a like broad estimate. It can be done way faster than this, but I would go with that. Something that kind of like takes more creativity, that can be interesting because it can actually sometimes go faster. When you have a designer that's going to be like, oh, I'm going to make 10 posts in 3 hours. Because as you look for ideas, you're going to kind of like get some, and you're going to put that in your template, like your big file with a bunch of artboards in it, and then you're going to swap things and try things. So sometimes that's actually faster than doing post by post. And yeah, I'm thinking like a bunch of examples right now, where yeah, if you leave a designer in their own bubble for a bit, they actually might come up with things faster than if it's like high direction, just because you're getting them to look for something very specific that doesn't necessarily exist. So I'm gonna go with high direction, 20 minutes per post. If it's free to do whatever you want, I want to go with 15 to 30, and then it can vary a lot more. If there's illustration in there that's like custom, if you need font work that's a little more creative, yeah, a more creative post can take like about an hour. That's not weird at all. I think my average was 40 minutes for something with like a little cartoon that would be recurring in a bunch of posts to change the position that they would be in, changing the copy, changing the background. Yeah, I think overall it would be 20, 40 minutes, possibly an hour, and possibly more if it's way more extensive than that. And again, that's statics. For ads, not motion. Motion is way longer than that. And for emails, obviously depends on the length. Also depends how you build it. If the designer just makes the mockup, or if they're actually going into MailChimp or whatever service that has template and replace it themselves, because sometimes you can get a mistake, like some sort of error that's not expected that you can't really fix because the code is kind of crappy. That can take longer. But an email design, like an average email design that's kind of creative and not just like one image, text, button, and that's it, would be, I'm going to go with an hour and a half to be a little more creative with it, yeah.
Cool. How much time do you spend like on a, let's say a very basic landing page?
Very, with the assets provided by the client, or that I have to look for?
No, you gotta look for
them. With all the testing, at least 6 hours.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. If it's just in Photoshop, just as a mockup, it can go faster. But that's usually not really clean, and then the developer has to make decisions over sizing, like placement, because I would say that most designers usually when they have a really short time, they would basically put a bunch of elements everywhere and kind of like make it look okay, but then that time is taken away from, is added, actually not taken away, is actually added to the developer's work. So sometimes it's usually better to either make it clean so that the developer saves time, or just like use a tool like Webflow to make it so that you're building it and it's coded at the same time. So that's 6 hours, like I said, is like basically coded out. So that's, you're saving time if you're doing that.
Do you guys ever have creative burnout? Like you just, because I imagine it's a very creative job, and sometimes if you're under especially high stress, stress is known to kill your creativity. So do you guys ever get like creative burnout when you're like, yo, I'm not an ideas machine all day long?
I feel like when anything is not stimulating, it's going to take longer to find a good idea. But also I find that I may be a little weird on that front, but most designers can be like a little too focused on visual creativity, when I think in general it's more important to be marketingly creative. So I would rather, if you give me a landing page to do, I would rather spend time on having the perfect like copy, like having something that's really catchy. I'd rather focus the time on that rather and my creativity on that, rather than trying to make it look pretty, because that to me is like halfway no job. I don't know, I'm not usually messagingly burned out, but visually I might just be a little more fuck it when I'm tired.
Okay.
But it's not necessarily that I don't have ideas anymore. It's just that it's going to be like I'm not going to do my best work, and I'm aware of it.
So let's have a fun story. Or actually, before I want to ask you about what your craziest, funniest, weirdest design story is. But before I do that, is there anything else you would like marketers to know, or any questions that you have for marketers? Or you're like, something I never understood about you guys?
Why? No, I feel like defining KPIs I think is a good thing. But I'm going a little far into the marketing world.
You just went like straight to.
Yeah, it's a little analytical.
One thing you guys gotta know is Meg actually loves data, and Meg gets really upset when you call her an artist, because she's not an artist. Designer.
Yeah.
there's strict guidelines and concepts behind design. Art's just whatever.
Exactly. I don't like designer artists.
But wait, what do you not like about art, though? You got to explain that, because that's actually really interesting to have someone who's a designer who's like, I'm not an artist. Like, don't offend me.
Because art is kind of like the poetry of the visual world. It's not something that has a goal, and that's the difference between art and design, historically speaking and philosophically speaking. Because I studied that and I hated it. But yeah, design has a function, art doesn't, and art should not have a function. So it's kind of interesting, because if you think about it in a philosophical damn it, the emphasis in this word is tricky, way. Logically, if you're making something that is art, but your goal is to make it aesthetic, it's not art anymore. It's aesthetic. That's also different. So there's art. Art is supposed to make you feel something. It's supposed to make you question values, the world, the society, whatever it can be. Aesthetic is something that's supposed to make you visually excited, only visually excited, nothing else. And then design is something that is visually built to fulfill a goal.
You may have just broken my brain. But...
So art is useless. No, so art is like poetry or written words. Useless. It's art is very much it's supposed to send a message, or like make you like feel an experience, or just make you think, but in a very philosophical way. When design is all built with a goal in mind, so you would not have a website that is art.
But it could be artsy.
It could be artsy, and it could be, I'm guessing, art in a very specific way, in the sense that it would just be an experience and nothing else.
So, is this flag behind me art or design, or aesthetic?
Well, it's a flag, so it's design, because every flag is supposed to represent something, and it's built to represent something. It's like a sign. But at the same
time, it's like not the original flag, right? It's
true.
Got like
it's an artsy take on the flag.
Okay, we're getting it. So it can be artsy, but it's still design. It's artsy design because it has a goal. It's a flag. It has a. It's not useless.
It's a visual interpretation of a flag.
Okay.
We're drifting away here.
Yeah, but I thought actually this might have been the most interesting part of this entire conversation. Is like, what's art, what's design?
Yeah.
That's really cool. So before I close this out and let you go back to your regular job of creating designs with goals, and actually I would love to hear a little bit more about what Webflow does after this too. What is your craziest, funniest, weirdest design story?
Oh boy. Where do I start? I have so many in my head, I don't know where to start. I feel like it has a lot to do with the manager in general. It's usually...
I feel like I know where this would be going.
Yeah. Overall, it's not necessarily on the one specific client.
You can tell us. It's just me and the rest of the internet.
And everyone else. I feel like every worst story has to do with micromanagement from higher level executives. It's like when, instead of letting anyone do their job, it would be like, oh, do this quickly. Like, do a quick thing. And my favorite thing is like when I got told to do a quick 3D animation. I was like, sure, give me 10 minutes. Every crazy story is about the way it's handled. It's not about the result, because ideally the result is not terrible. But if I'm thinking of a terrible one that I'm not going to name, it would be when the agency listens to literally anything the client wants and does not put goals as a priority. So let's say you're making a website that has a specific goal. The client tells you, "Oh no, that's not what I want. I want it differently." And then you do it again, and then the goal changes. And in a matter of days, there's no goal anymore. There's no goal because the client like puts their ideas in there, and then you're losing the purpose of the actual site based on personal preferences. So let's say the goal of a page is to sell plants, and the client is like, "Oh, that's cute and all, but I also like tractors and flying elephants, and I want that on the main page." It sounds far-fetched, but it's actually not that much. it's not that far-fetched. So to please the client, you actually put flying elephants on the homepage and tractors.
Like you just have to say what kind of product it was and what they wanted on the page now.
Well, it was still selling plants here.
Okay.
Except that the clients want tractors and elephants on the page. The goal hasn't changed.
What was the original campaign, though? I want to know. The internet needs to know what was the original product you were selling. You don't have to name the brand, but what was the actual product that you were trying to sell on that webpage?
Like the real story?
Yeah.
So there was cryptocurrency. Yeah.
And elephants.
And
tractors.
Well, I actually replaced everything with something else just to like blur everything. But there was cryptocurrency. There's a bunch of apps that are terrible at identifying sometimes why they even exist. It's not even their marketing. It's like sometimes their products are not. That's also a problem with agency life. Is that you have no input on the product. If the product is crap, you still have to sell it.
Yeah,
that's the worst part of it all, and that's why agency work is actually great when you're young, because you're gonna see how hard it is, and then you're gonna be really excited when you actually work in a product company.
So that brings me actually to what you're doing now, which is working for Webflow.
Yeah, I did the transition on purpose.
Yes, thank you. I know, like, when we worked together at BAMF, I know you were, like, a huge proponent of Webflow. You would basically mention it only, like, every second day and say, let's make it on Webflow. So tell us a little bit about what Webflow is and why you recommend it to designers.
Yeah. So I got really lucky because I got hired by a product that I actually like and worked with in the past, which is really lucky. So what Webflow does and why it's something that I've been promoting for a really long time is that you have a lot of website builders online that exist. There's like Wix, Squarespace, Weebly, there's a bunch of them. But all of them are focused on enabling anyone to build visually what they want, but they're not really focusing attention on the quality of the site that's going to come out of it. So the visual builder is easy to use, but the way it's going to be like translated into code is in a very, very bad way. So your site ends up being really slow, and you also have either visual limitations or technical limitations. For example, a site that's supposed to be responsive, the responsiveness in, for example, Wix is actually not really well handled. So you have to kind of move things around to make it work with most screens, but you can't really optimize it for every size. And what Webflow does differently is that the goal is not necessarily to let anyone build a website in the visual way. It's to actually replace most of coding for everyone. So you would build your site visually. You would still use a lot of principles that you use when you're coding, but the fact that you're doing it as if you were coding but visually makes the code that comes out of it extremely clean. And that's the main difference. You can actually export the code and edit stuff, and you can use it for literally anything. And that's what I really love about the product, is that it's efficient, it has a goal, there's obviously demand, and it allows you to actually code visually, which, even if you don't know how to code, is really interesting to learn. So yeah, it's really practical for everything. You can plug in anything you want, and it's clean.
This is only the 34th time I've heard her pitch on Webflow, just so you all know. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what Meg does when she walks around through San Francisco. She goes, "Hey, have you guys heard of Webflow?"
Do you have a minute to talk about Webflow?
A minute to talk about Webflow.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. So, guys, make sure, Meg, you are creating all the content for Webflow currently, correct? So you're creating video,
yes,
stuff like that?
I'm creating video. I'm also creating ads. I'm making smaller pieces of content. I'm helping here and there with a lot of different things, but mostly my job is to make videos about new features, about best practices in web design, and we're actually moving slowly to actually teaching web design in general, and or design in general, and not only in Webflow, but everything that you need to build before it actually gets into Webflow as well.
Cool. So, guys, if you're a designer, make sure to check out the Webflow channel, where Meg's creating a ton of really, really good content. She's actually really hilarious, so you'll see a lot of funny stuff. Also, make sure to check out Meg's personal channel, which is also really, really cool if you're a designer, and has a ton of really cool tutorials and cats. And, yeah. Meg, any last words?
Keep focusing on KPIs and not art.
Meg Wehrlen, designer, not artist. Thank you for your time, Meg. We really, really appreciate it. And stay tuned, everyone, for the rest of our interview series. Next up, we're going to be talking a little bit about PR Netflix. So get excited, subscribe, and definitely make sure to check out Meg's cats.
Cat.
And
flying cats on some things.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.